The day the tide turned against the king began like any other. King Cnut, the mighty ruler of England, Denmark, and parts of Sweden and Norway, sat on the shore of the sea, his eyes fixed on the waves as they crept closer to his feet. His courtiers, eager to flatter him, had suggested that he could command the ocean itself. Cnut, known for his sharp wit and stern rule, decided to prove them wrong. He watched as the water lapped at his feet, a clear reminder that even a king's power has limits. The courtiers, realizing their mistake, fell silent. It was a moment that would be remembered for generations, a symbol of the king's humility and wisdom. Cnut's reign, however, was far from humble. He was a man of great ambition and even greater power. When he first arrived in England, he was not welcomed with open arms. The country had been ravaged by years of Viking raids, and the people were tired of war. But Cnut, a skilled warrior and a shrewd politician, knew how to win the hearts of his subjects. He married Emma, the widow of the previous king, Æthelred, and with her he gained the loyalty of the English nobility. He also showered the church with gifts, earning the support of the clergy, who saw him as a pious and generous ruler. Cnut's rule brought a new level of stability to England. He reorganized the shire courts, where earls and sheriffs worked together to maintain law and order. Earls who were appointed by the king were responsible for leading the local armed forces and presiding over the courts. Sheriffs, often appointed by the earls but sometimes directly by the king, handled the day-to-day administration of the shires. This system, while effective, also meant that the king had a tight grip on the country's governance. But Cnut's reign was not without its challenges. The king's military campaigns, especially those in Scandinavia, required vast sums of money. To fund these expeditions, he imposed heavy taxes on the English people. The Romescot, or Peter's pence, a tax collected for the church in Rome, was just one of many. The burden of these taxes was so great that some landholders were forced to sell their property or melt down precious church artifacts to pay. Despite this, the king's wealth and the efficiency of the English administrative system allowed him to fund his ambitious projects, including the construction of new mints in Denmark and the commissioning of lavish gifts for foreign dignitaries. Cnut's relationship with the church was complex. He was known for his piety, often visiting religious sites and making generous donations. He even walked barefoot for 5 miles to the church of St. Cuthbert in Durham, a show of devotion that impressed many, but his generosity was also a political tool. By endowing abbeys and shrines, he secured the loyalty of the clergy and the support of the people. His most famous endowment was to the shrine of St. Ulf, in Canterbury, a gesture that further solidified his position as a protector of the church. Despite his successes, Cnut's reign was not without its darker moments. The year 1027 saw a rare moment of conflict when Cnut led an expedition into Scotland to force King Malcolm to submit to his rule. This was the only time the English saw war during Cnut's reign, a testament to the king's ability to maintain peace through diplomacy and force. As Cnut's rule neared its end, the question of succession loomed large. His marriage to Emma had produced 2 sons, Harthacnut and Gunhild, but he also had 2 older sons, Harold and Sweyn, from his first marriage to Ælfjafu of Northampton. When Cnut died in 1035, the stage was set for a bitter struggle for the throne. Harold, known as Harefoot, quickly seized power with the support of the Londoners and northern lords. Harthacnut, still in Denmark, was backed by the powerful Earl Godwine and the people of Wessex. The country was divided, and the tension was palpable. In the midst of this turmoil, Emma played a crucial role. She had been a queen twice over, and was not about to be sidelined. She held the royal treasure in Winchester, hoping to use it to support her son, Harthacnut. But Harold, with his supporters, managed to seize the treasure and secure his position as king. The situation was further complicated by the return of Æthelred's sons, Edward and Alfred, from Normandy. Alfred's attempt to claim the throne ended in tragedy when he was captured, blinded, and died from his injuries. Edward, however, managed to escape and return to Normandy. The year 1040 saw a dramatic shift in the balance of power. Harold died, and Harthacnut, with the support of Earl Godwine, finally claimed the throne. His reign, however, was short and marked by brutal actions. When the people of Worcestershire resisted his tax collectors, He ordered the city to be burned and the inhabitants to be punished. Harthacnut's rule was harsh, and many began to look to Edward as a more favorable alternative. In 1042, Harthacnut died suddenly, and Edward, known as the Confessor, ascended to the throne. He was welcomed by the people and the nobility, who saw him as a return to stability and piety. But the story of Cnut's reign and the struggle for the throne was far from over. The legacy of the Danish king and his empire would continue to shape the future of England, long after the waves had retreated from his feet on that fateful day by the sea. Emma of Normandy's life was a story of ambition, politics, and the struggle for power in a man's world. Born into a noble family in Normandy, Emma was a woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence. She became a queen not once, but twice, through marriages to two powerful kings of England, Æthelred the Unready and Cnut the Great. In 1017, Emma married Æthelred, who was already in his 50s, while she was in her early 20s. Their marriage was a political alliance to strengthen ties between England and Normandy. Emma and Æthelred had two sons, Edward and Alfred, but Æthelred's reign was marked by constant conflict with the Danes. When Æthelred died in 1016, the Danish king Cnut took the throne. Surprisingly, Cnut also married Emma, solidifying his claim to the English throne and ensuring the loyalty of the Norman faction. Emma's second marriage to Cnut was more than just a political move. It was a union of two powerful individuals. Cnut was a fierce warrior and a skilled ruler, while Emma was a woman of great influence and wisdom. Together, they ruled over a vast empire that included England, Denmark, and Norway. Emma was not just a queen but a partner in Cnut's rule, often acting as regent when he was away on campaign. However, Emma's life was not without its challenges. After Cnut's death in 1035, her stepson Harold Harefoot claimed the throne, sidelining her own sons, Harthacnut and Edward. Emma was forced to flee to Flanders, where she began to plot her return to power. In 1040, Harthacnut finally became king, and Emma returned to England, only to see her son die just 2 years later. Edward, her son from her first marriage, then became king in 1042. Upon returning to England, Emma found herself in a precarious position. Edward, who had been in exile for most of his life, was now king, and he did not share the same affection for his mother as he did for his Norman allies. In 1043, Edward, along with the powerful Earls Godwine, Leofric, and Seward, moved against Emma and her advisor, Bishop Stigand. They seized her wealth and forced her to leave the royal court. Emma was sent to a nunnery in Winchester, where she spent her remaining years. Despite her fall from grace, Emma's legacy lived on. She had been a queen who played a significant role in the politics of her time, and her sons, Edward and Harthacnut, had ruled England. Her life was a testament to the challenges faced by women in a world dominated by men, but also to the strength and resilience of those who dared to assert their influence. Emma's story was later immortalized in the Encomium Emmae Reginae, a book she likely commissioned and partly dictated. The book not only praised her, but also supported the claims of her son Harthacnut to the throne. It depicted Emma as a wise and powerful queen, a fitting companion to a warrior king, and a key player in the political landscape of England. Edward the Confessor, who became king in 1042, faced his own set of challenges. He was a man of deep faith and a lover of hunting, but he was also a shrewd politician. His court was cosmopolitan, with Normans, Bretons, and Danes all vying for influence. Edward's relationship with Earl Godwine of Wessex was particularly complex. Godwine, a powerful nobleman, had been a key supporter of Cnut and had married into the Danish royal family. Edward, however, was wary of Godwine's power and the influence of his family, especially after the Earl's son, Sweyn, was involved in a scandal involving the abduction and rape of an abbess. In 1051, tensions between Edward and Godwine came to a head. Edward, frustrated by Godwine's refusal to punish the citizens of Dover for an attack on his brother-in-law, Count Eustace of Boulogne, ordered the Earl to take action. When Godwine refused, the two sides prepared for conflict. However, a full-scale civil war was averted, and Godwine and his family were forced into exile. Edward's queen, Edith, Godwine's daughter, was sent to a nunnery, and the king's Norman advisors, including Bishop Robert of Jumièges, gained more influence. The following year, Godwine and his sons returned to England with a powerful force, and Edward was forced to restore their titles and lands. The episode highlighted the delicate balance of power in England, and the king's reliance on powerful nobles like Godwine. Edward's reign was marked by his efforts to strengthen the church and his commitment to building Westminster Abbey, a grand structure that would become a symbol of his piety and power. However, his lack of an heir and his close ties to Normandy would have lasting consequences. When Edward died in 1066, the question of succession would lead to the Norman conquest, changing the course of English history forever. The year 1052 was a turning point for the Godwine family. King Edward the Confessor, always wary of the powerful Godwines, had ordered a fleet to stand by at Sandwich and alerted coastal commanders to intercept Godwine's fleet as it returned from Flanders. Despite the king's precautions, a series of gales scattered both the royalist and rebel forces. The Godwines, however, managed to regroup, and with their ships covering the sea and weapons glinting in the sunlight, they crossed the English Channel and established themselves on the south bank of the Thames. This move put them in a strong position to threaten the king and his loyal French supporters in London. The Londoners, who had been lukewarm in their support of the king, now turned against him. Realizing he could not rely on the city's backing, Edward had no choice but to negotiate. The French party, including the Bishop of Jumièges and the French bishops of Dorchester and London, were forced to flee the city. The Godwines were declared innocent of all charges, and their lands and honors were restored. Edward, advised by his council, gave Godwine the kiss of peace, and Queen Edith, Godwine's daughter, was welcomed back to court. The king's authority and prestige took a significant hit, and his enemies were declared outlaws. After this victory, the Godwines' influence in England became almost absolute. Although Earl Godwine himself died in 1053 from a seizure during a banquet, his son Harold smoothly took over as Earl of Wessex. Harold was a shrewd politician and a skilled military leader. He diplomatically surrendered his position in East Anglia to Æthelred of Mercia, the son of the powerful Earl Leofric, to maintain good relations with other powerful families. However, when Siward, the Earl of Northumbria, died in 1055, the Godwines saw an opportunity to strengthen their hold on the north. Siward's son was too young to succeed, and Leofric of Mercia was too old to combine the earldoms of Mercia and Northumbria. The Godwines' younger brother, Tostig, was appointed Earl of Northumbria, much to the dismay of the Northumbrians, who found his rule strict and oppressive. Tostig's appointment was seen as a direct challenge to the power of the Northumbrian aristocracy, and it set the stage for future conflict. In 1057, Earl Leofric of Mercia died, and his son Æthelred inherited the earldom. However, the Godwines continued to expand their influence. Geath Godwinson became the sole Earl of East Anglia, and Harold took over the earldom of Hereford, which had been held by the French Lord Ralph. Harold's younger brother, Leofwine, was given control of the southeastern shires. By 1060, the only major earldom not under Godwine control was Mercia. Tostig, the Earl of Northumbria, was a complex figure. Despite his unpopularity in the north, he felt confident enough in his position to leave his earldom for a year to lead a diplomatic mission to Rome with the new Archbishop of York, Æthelred. They traveled down the Rhine, visiting shrines and demonstrating Tostig's piety and political passion. Tostig and his wife, Judith of Flanders, were known for their religious devotion and patronage, including a large gold and silver crucifix donated to the Church of St. Cuthbert in Durham. The Godwines' influence at court was evident through Queen Edith, who wielded considerable power. She amassed vast wealth and land, with holdings scattered across England, from Old Wessex to the Eastern Midlands. King Edward, meanwhile, focused on hunting and ecclesiastical matters, often leaving the day-to-day governance to the Godwines. In the late 1050s and early 1060s, England faced challenges from its Celtic neighbors. Malcolm III of Scotland, who owed his throne to English support, made incursions into Northumbria. The Welsh Prince Gruffydd ap Llywelyn of Gwynedd and Powys also posed a threat, defeating the English forces led by the warrior Bishop Leofgar of Hereford in 1055. It wasn't until 1063 that Harold and Tostig, working together, managed to subdue Gruffydd. Their campaign was successful, and Gruffydd was killed by his own men, who then surrendered to Harold. By 1066, Harold Godwinson was the most powerful man in England. He was the richest landowner, the king's most trusted advisor, and a skilled military leader. He was tall, well-built, and known for his eloquence and courage. Harold's relationship with Edith Swanek, a wealthy woman with extensive landholdings, produced 5 children. Though their relationship was not recognized by the church, they were a devoted couple. Harold was also deeply religious, collecting relics and supporting religious institutions. He built a beautiful stone church at Waltham Holy Cross, which impressed King Edward. Harold's visits to the continent, including a possible trip to Rome, showed his interest in religious reforms and fine manuscript illumination. He was also known to have visited Normandy, where he allegedly pledged his support to William, the Duke of Normandy, as the next King of England. This visit is depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry, though historians debate its historical accuracy. In 1065, Harold faced a crisis in Northumbria. The Northumbrians, tired of Tostig's harsh rule, rebelled and declared him an outlaw. They invited Morcar, the younger son of Aelfgar of Mercia, to be their earl. Harold met with the rebels at Oxford and agreed to their demands. King Edward, who was dying, confirmed the appointment, and Tostig was exiled. Harold, to secure peace, married Morcar's sister, a move that further solidified his position. When King Edward died on January 5, 1066, Harold was crowned king the next day. The coronation was hasty, but it was supported by the Witan, the Council of Nobles. Harold's claim to the throne was strong, and he had the backing of the English magnates. However, his coronation set the stage for a conflict with William of Normandy, who claimed that Edward had promised him the throne. The stage was set for the Battle of Hastings, which would determine the future of England. In the year 1066, England was a land of tension and uncertainty. The death of King Edward the Confessor left a power vacuum, and several claimants vied for the throne. Among them was Harold Godwinson, who was supported by the English nobility and the clergy. The E-version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written in the scriptorium of Peterborough Abbey, confirms that Harold was chosen to succeed Edward. Even William of Poitiers, a Norman supporter, believed that Edward had nominated Harold as his heir. Harold was crowned by Archbishop Æthelred of York, but Norman sources claimed that the coronation was conducted by Stigand of Canterbury, who was considered an anti-pope by the church. Harold's reign was short but intense. He spent most of his time preparing for the inevitable invasions. The country's wealth was used to fund the war effort, with mints across England producing thousands of pennies bearing Harold's image. The threat from the Welsh and the Norwegian king, Harold Hardrada, who allied with Harold's brother Tostig, added to the king's challenges. Meanwhile, William of Normandy was amassing his forces along the Channel coast, waiting for favorable winds to launch his invasion. In September, the Norwegians struck first, sailing into the Humber estuary and marching on York. Harold's brothers, Edwin and Morcar, were defeated in a battle near the River Ouse. Undeterred, Harold marched his army north and on September 25th met the invaders at Stamford Bridge. The battle was fierce, but Harold emerged victorious. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig were killed, and the Norwegian fleet was reduced from 300 ships to just 24. However, Harold's triumph was short-lived. The winds in the Channel had changed, and William's fleet was able to cross unopposed. On September 28th, William landed at Pevensey and quickly moved to Hastings. Harold, having just returned from the north, rushed south to meet the Normans. By October 7th, he was in London, gathering his forces. The night before the battle, the English were reportedly carousing, while the Normans, with their clean-shaven faces, were mistaken for priests by the English. The next day, Harold took his position on a hill at Senlac, about 7 miles from Hastings. The English formed a shield wall, and the battle raged from morning until dusk. Despite the English holding their ground against repeated Norman cavalry charges, a tactical feint by the Normans caused the shield wall to break. The English, thinking the Normans were retreating, pursued them and were surrounded and cut down. Harold, fighting under his banner of the armed man, was killed, possibly by an arrow to the eye. The defeat at Hastings was devastating. Harold's brothers, Geoff and Leofwine, and many other Anglo-Saxon nobles lay dead. William, now the conqueror, set about securing his new kingdom. He led a brutal campaign through the southern counties, suppressing any resistance. In December, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. William's reign was far from peaceful. Local uprisings continued, especially in the southwest, where Harold's son Godwine and his grandmother, Geitha, led revolts. In 1068, William besieged Exeter, and Geitha fled to St. Omer with her wealth. The following year, Harold's brothers and Godwine returned with a fleet from Ireland, but were driven back by the Bretons. In 1069, a Danish fleet under King Sweyn II arrived in the Humber, sparking a major rebellion in the north. The city of York fell to the rebels, and the young Edgar the Ætheling, who had been in exile in Scotland, joined the uprising. William responded with a brutal campaign known as the Harrying of the North, which left the region devastated. The Domesday Book, compiled 15 years later, recorded the widespread destruction. During this time, a hero emerged in the form of Hereward the Wake. He joined forces with Earl Morcar and Bishop Aelfwine of Durham, holding out at Ely Abbey. Ely, with its strategic position in the Fenlands, became a symbol of resistance. However, the rebels' efforts were ultimately futile, and the Norman conquest of England was complete. The story of the Norman conquest and its aftermath is a tale of dramatic change, intense conflict, and the transformation of a nation. In the spring following his victory at Hastings, William the Conqueror had crushed the last of the English resistance, bringing the rebel kingdom back to heel. His campaign, which historian David Douglas called one of the outstanding military achievements of the age, secured his rule, and the Danes, who had been a thorn in his side, finally left England with their ships laden with plunder. The leaders of the rebellion at Ely made their peace, but the legendary figure of Hereward the Wake slipped away, his fate shrouded in mystery. Some say William pardoned him, and he fled to France, where he was later hunted down and killed by Norman enemies. Whether true or not, Hereward's story became a symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance. Edgar the Ætheling, the last real hope of the Anglo-Saxons, had been named king by the English bishops and nobles in 1066, but his reign was short-lived. He eventually joined the First Crusade, where he was remembered as a handsome and eloquent man, a relic of a bygone era. The death of Edward the Confessor marked a pivotal moment. According to the Vita Edwardi Regis, Edward, as he lay dying, entrusted the kingdom to Harold, saying, "I commend this woman with all the kingdom to your protection." Harold was crowned king, but the Normans branded him a perjurer, accusing him of breaking an oath to William. From the English perspective, William, a distant relative with no claim to the throne, was a usurper who sought to conquer a Christian kingdom by force. The Normans, with the Pope's blessing, invaded and conquered England in a single, decisive battle. The English army was shattered at Hastings, and William's rule was enforced through terror. His soldiers, drawn from across northern France, ravaged the countryside, and the land was redistributed to his followers. The English people were forced to labor, tearing down their own ancient buildings and constructing the grand Norman structures that still stand today. The Norman conquest brought profound changes to England. The English language and literature were suppressed, and the Anglo-Saxon Church, with its rich traditions, was dismantled. The new Norman bishops and clergy replaced the old, and many of the Anglo-Saxon religious practices, including the cult of the Virgin Mary, were abolished. William's rule was not just about conquest, it was also about governance. He relied on the existing Anglo-Saxon administrative system, particularly the shire courts, to maintain order and collect taxes. The Domesday Book, a comprehensive survey of the land and its holdings, was a crucial tool in this process. It helped William understand the extent of his new kingdom and ensured that his followers did not overstep their bounds. The Norman conquest was not just a military victory, it was a cultural and social revolution. The Normans built castles and cathedrals, symbols of their power and the new order. The English people, once the rulers of their land, found themselves under the thumb of a foreign elite. Yet, despite the hardships, the old Anglo-Saxon traditions and the resilience of the English people persisted. In 1100, the death of William Rufus in a hunting accident in the New Forest seemed to many a sign of divine retribution. His brother Henry, quick to act, secured the treasury and was crowned king just 3 days later. Henry promised to uphold the laws of Edward the Confessor, a pledge that resonated with the English people. He married Matilda, a descendant of the Anglo-Saxon royal line, further solidifying his claim to the throne. Henry's reign saw the integration of Norman and English cultures. He defeated his brother Robert in 1106 and brought Normandy under his control. The English troops, now loyal to a king who had married into their royal family, fought with enthusiasm, and Henry's rule was secure. The Norman conquest changed the face of England forever, but the spirit of the English people endured. The legacy of this era is a blend of old and new, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of a nation that has faced and overcome great challenges.